Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Courage in Fur for more amazing dog stories. Heavenwood, Georgia was a town where unlocked doors were the norm and children's laughter echoed freely through shaded streets. People knew each other's stories, their triumphs and quiet heartbreaks. Yet beneath this peaceful rhythm, a different sound could be heard. The faint rustle of unanswered questions. The silent plea of missing faces that haunted the town's collective heart. Missing child posters, once neatly placed on the community board, would gather dust before being replaced by new ones. A cycle of quiet, agonizing ache. The whispers of collective anxiety would grow, then fade, drowned out by the comforting routines of life, as uncomfortable truths were often pushed to the periphery. However, some simply could not or would not ignore it. Officer David Miller was one such soul. A man forged from Havenwood's own resilience, David possessed a quiet strength and a keen mind, honed by years in the Marines and on the force, coupled with an unwavering sense of justice. He had confronted the ugly underbelly of humanity in far-off lands and on his hometown streets, yet he held a profound hope, a belief that light could be found even in the darkest corners, if one looked hard enough and had the right partner. That partner was Max. More than just a dog, Max was David's shadow, his confidant, his other half. This magnificent Labrador had a gentle demeanor that charmed everyone, his tail a constant blur of happiness. Beneath that friendly exterior, however, lay a razor-sharp intuition, a nose capable of detecting a whisper of scent from afar, and boundless loyalty. Their bond transcended leash and collar. It was a language of shared glances, subtle ear twitches, and silent understanding, forged by navigating life's challenges together. Max's instincts often served as David's earliest warning system, making him David's anchor in storms, and David, Max's unwavering hand. Their story was a seamless extension of one another, a harmony of unspoken communication. The call came on a routine Tuesday. It was from Ms. Evelyn Reed, an elderly resident near Little Stars Daycare, a brightly painted building that seemed plucked from a child's storybook. Ms. Reed wasn't complaining about noisy children, she was distraught. She reported screaming and scratching through the night, sounds she initially dismissed as raccoons or stray cats. But then she mentioned a peculiar, sweet, sickly smell emanating from the daycare after hours, a scent she couldn't place but that turned her stomach. David, experienced with countless noise complaints, tried to temper his expectations. "Kids are always making noise, Ms. Reed," he offered gently. "It's probably nothing, but we'll check it out." He knew how easily critical information could be overlooked, especially when it came from someone perceived as a little eccentric. This dismissive attitude, a common mistake, often led to devastating oversights. But Ms. Reed's description of that smell pricked at David's unease, a quiet alarm in his seasoned gut. He decided to bring Max. Max's initial role was merely a comforting canine presence for parents. However, the moment he stepped through the daycare's brightly colored doors, his relaxed demeanor vanished. His body stiffened, his nose twitching furiously, and he moved with a purposeful, low-to-the-ground intensity David knew well. Max ignored the cheerful crayon murals and familiar daycare smells. His focus was absolute, his entire being locked onto something unseen by human eyes. Ms. Clara Peterson, the daycare director, a woman in her mid-40s with a forced, brittle smile, greeted them. Her voice was overly cheerful, almost saccharine, but her eyes darted nervously. Max, however, wasn't interested in food or polite greetings. He bypassed the staff, walked straight past Ms. Peterson, and made a beeline for the nap room. A cozy space with colorful foam rugs and tiny cots. There, Max began to circle the edges of a bright rainbow-colored rug. Then, without warning, he began to dig. His claws scraped hard against the laminate floor, a harsh grating sound that cut through the deceptive cheer of the daycare. Max let out a low, urgent growl, a sound that sent an immediate shiver down David's spine. It wasn't aggression. It was something primal, signaling vulnerability and a profound wrong. Miss Peterson rushed over, her forced smile crumbling. "Officer Miller, please. He's just being a dog. We just had these floors cleaned. He's disrupting everything." She even tried to physically pull Max away, her grip surprisingly strong, her voice tinged with a desperation impossible to ignore. She threatened to call animal control, her words revealing a panic far beyond mere inconvenience. But David, observing Max's unyielding focus and desperate intensity, knew this was no playful curiosity. This was a critical, unignorable signal. He placed a calming hand on Max's back, eyes locked on the spot. He knew with unshakable certainty that Max was telling him a story no one wanted to hear. And in that moment, David chose to listen. David's instincts, honed by years of trusting Max, overruled Miss Peterson's desperate protests. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm going to need to take a closer look under this rug." Miss Peterson hesitated, her face paling. "Is that necessary? The children are due back from morning circle time any second." But David didn't move. He knelt down, Max still scratching, and carefully peeled back the edge of the colorful foam rug. The air seemed to hold its breath. And there it was. A faint, almost perfectly square outline in the laminate floorboards. It was sloppily painted over, a clumsy attempt to disguise what lay beneath. The wood didn't quite match, and the nails, old, rusted, flat against the surface, looked hastily hammered down years ago. A cold dread seeped into David's stomach. Max let out a sharp, piercing bark, then again, louder, the sound echoing through the falsely cheerful daycare like a wailing siren. A few small children peered nervously from the hallway, their innocent faces etched with confusion, and the young assistant, Jenna, barely 20, stood frozen near the door, her lips pale, her eyes wide with unconcealable terror. David turned to her, his voice gentle. "Jenna, are you okay?" She nodded too quickly, unable to meet his gaze. "Yeah, just startled. That dog's got a loud bark." Her avoidance spoke volumes. David slowly stood, resting his hand on Max's trembling back. Max was now pawing furiously at the square, desperate to dig through it. "We're going to need to document this," David said aloud, more to himself, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Ms. Peterson stepped in again, her voice more forceful this time. "Officer Miller, I don't think this is appropriate during operating hours. We run a very clean, very compliant daycare here." She was practically spitting the words, her desperation turning to thinly veiled aggression. David didn't answer. He knelt and tapped gently on the wooden panel. It was hollow. He tapped again. This time, Jenna let out a soft gasp, choked with fear. "What's your name?" David asked, standing and turning to her directly. The girl froze. "Me?" "Yes, Jenna. How long have you worked here, Jenna?" 3 months. David's gaze was steady. "Have you ever heard anything strange in this room?" She swallowed hard, eyes darting toward Miss Peterson, who watched them like a hawk. "Sometimes," Jenna whispered, "sometimes I thought I heard noises under the floor, like crying." But Miss Peterson said it was just the plumbing. David looked back at the floor. Plumbing didn't cry. He stepped outside the nap room to radio dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller at Little Stars Daycare. I've got a potential structural anomaly and a canine alert, requesting backup and building inspection, possible code violation." Max barked again, deeper, sharper, as if confirming every word. The next moment shattered any remaining pretense of normalcy. As David turned back, he saw one of the children, a little boy no older than 4, walk up to Max and point to the floor. "That's where the other kids went," the boy whispered, his innocent voice cutting through the air like a knife. David crouched down, his heart tightening in his chest. "What do you mean, buddy?" The boy looked around, then leaned close to Max, burying his face in the dog's fur. "They won't go down there when they don't listen. The lady said they have to learn to be quiet." David felt his chest constrict. He stood up fast. Miss Peterson tried to speak, but David cut her off. "No one's leaving this building until I get a team in here, and I need access to every staff file, every floor plan, and the licensing documents, now." She opened her mouth to protest, but Max growled again, long and low, not threatening, just absolutely profoundly sure that something was terribly wrong. And so was David. The daycare had fallen silent. Too silent. 8 minutes had passed since David's alert call, an eternity. Max remained on the scratched floor, a silent sentry, tense, ears alert, nose low. Across the room, Miss Peterson sat stiffly on a blue plastic chair, arms crossed, her forced smile gone. She had said little since backup was called, continually glancing at the floor, then away, as if trying to forget something. Jenna, the young assistant, sipped orange juice in the break room, her hands shaking. She avoided eye contact with everyone. Suddenly, Max grunted and resumed scratching, raking his claws on the laminate. David looked down. The trapdoor outline was now clearer, but what caught his eye next was not the trapdoor itself, but a dull reddish-brown smear near the rug's edge. David bent down. "What is that?" He ran a gloved finger across the stain. It wasn't paint. It was old, tacky, soaked into the wood grain. He cautiously sniffed. Iron. Rust. No. Blood. Old blood. He stood up quickly. "Ms. Peterson," he said, his voice sharp now. Why is there blood in your nap room? She stiffened. There is no way. That's blood. This is a daycare. Kids scrape knees. There are accidents. No accident left that pattern, David retorted, snapping pictures with his phone and a forensic tag. Max barked sharply, as if in agreement. Miss Peterson's voice wavered. Look, we've had issues in the past. Kids fall sometimes. They hide cuts. I can't watch all of them every second. David narrowed his eyes. And what about that boy earlier? The one who said kids go down there when they don't listen. Ms. Peterson's face turned red. Kids have vivid imaginations. He's 4 years old. David didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Jenna, who had just peeked into the hallway. Jenna, he said gently, can I talk to you for a moment? She hesitated, then stepped forward, paper cup in hand. How long have you been here? He asked. 3 months, she replied, barely above a whisper. Did anyone ever show you what's under the floor? She shook her head. No, but I did hear things. What kind of things, Jenna? Jenna's eyes welled with tears. Whimpering, like a dog, but not like someone trying not to cry. I told Miss Peterson and she told me the plumbing knocks when the heat kicks in, but it didn't sound like pipes. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. Did you ever see children disappear from this place? Kids who didn't come back? Jenna looked down. I don't know, she said. Maybe they don't let us see the whole sign-in sheet. Sometimes a kid would be here on Monday and gone by Tuesday. I thought maybe they just unenrolled. I didn't want to ask too many questions. Miss Peterson doesn't like that. David took a slow breath and nodded. Thank you, Jenna. That helps a lot. A loud knock came from the entrance. Backup had arrived. 2 uniformed officers, a building inspector, and a Child Protective Services (CPS) agent. David met them, quickly briefing them on Max's discoveries, the bloodstain, the unusual seam, and the child's disturbing comments. The building inspector, an older man with a gray beard, scratched his head. A hidden crawlspace under a daycare? Not standard. I'll need to take a look. David led the group to the nap room. Max stepped back as the inspector knelt beside the trap door and tapped the floor with a metal probe. Hollow, the inspector muttered, and look at the grain. This isn't factory flooring. Someone replaced this panel manually. He pried a corner loose with a crowbar. A soft creak, then a cold whoosh of air. The trap door lifted slowly, revealing a narrow wooden shaft. It dropped about 6 feet, with a wooden ladder bolted to one side. The air that rose was stale and sour, making everyone recoil. David shone his flashlight down. A concrete floor, blank walls, a small pile of something in the far corner. Jesus, one of the officers muttered. There's a room under there. The CPS agent turned to Miss Peterson. You didn't disclose this space in your licensing paperwork. Why? Miss Peterson's lips trembled. I didn't know it was there. Jenna let out a noise, half laugh, half sob. She's lying. She always walked around that corner. She knew. David turned to Max. You ready, partner? Max barked once. David took a breath and descended the ladder. Max close behind. The flashlight beam swept slowly across the room. What they saw sent a chill up his spine. It wasn't just a storage area. There were old sleeping bags, child-sized empty food wrappers, a broken toy, and a dented aluminum bucket in the far corner. The air smelled of urine and mold. David turned slowly, his flashlight illuminating scratch marks on the wall, some shallow, some deep. He moved the beam toward the ceiling and spotted a tiny grate, a vent just big enough to let in faint sounds from above. David muttered, "This wasn't a panic room. This was a holding cell." Max let out a low growl and padded toward the far end, sniffing near the back wall. He stopped and barked, short, urgent. David joined him. Behind a wooden panel partially rotted with moisture, he found a hidden compartment. Inside were 2 dolls, a sippy cup with a faded child's name, and a small medical bracelet. He picked it up slowly, heart racing. It read, Name, Harper L. Doobie, November 18th, 2020. He swallowed hard. This is recent. Upstairs, the CPS agent and officers had begun questioning staff and quarantining the building. Parents were being contacted. Authorities were cross-checking missing persons reports with the daycare's client list. David climbed back up, face pale, holding the bracelet. Call in a forensic team, he said quietly, and a trauma response unit. Max stayed beside him, body rigid, eyes locked on the hole in the floor. As David stood in the doorway, watching emergency vehicles arrive, one thought looped in his mind. How many kids cried down there and no one came? And how many times had Max, even in retirement, still known what no one else dared to believe? News of the trapdoor under Little Star's daycare spread like wildfire. By noon, half of Havenwood knew. Some whispered of a forgotten storm shelter. Others, remembering the rising tally of missing posters, knew it was far worse. David Miller dealt in evidence, not rumors. What he saw beneath that floor was deliberate, a sealed room, hidden from the world, with bedding, wrappers, toys, and a medical bracelet that didn't belong to any enrolled child. By the time forensics arrived, David had already briefed 2 detectives, the Mason County CPS director and a missing persons investigator from Atlanta. They all shared the same stunned expression upon entering the nap room, but it was Max's behavior that spoke volumes. The old Labrador wouldn't leave the trap door. He circled it like a soldier guarding a fallen comrade. Every so often he'd bark sharply, stare at the open hatch and let out a low growl, as if daring someone to go back down. David knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't move, eyes fixed on the darkness below. David scratched behind his ears. "You know something else, don't you?" He suddenly remembered a Marine Corps raid. Max, then a young canine, had frozen in a seemingly empty hallway. 10 seconds later, the floor collapsed, revealing 2 women and a child trapped inside a hidden chamber. Max had sensed that hidden void, the subtle shift in air, the faint echo of life. And he was sensing it now. David stood and turned to Detective Isabella Reyes, a sharp, no-nonsense detective from the State Bureau. "There's something else down there," he said, "something we didn't find." Isabella looked surprised. "You went through the whole chamber, right?" "Yeah," David said, "but not everything. Max thinks there's more." She shrugged but nodded. "Then we go back in." They descended together. David, Isabella, and Max, wearing gloves, masks, and headlamps. The trapdoor had been widened. The smell was now worse, unmistakably human. The concrete room below still looked the same, but Isabella began scanning the walls with an infrared sensor while David watched Max. Max moved with purpose. He walked to the far end where the wooden panel had been, but this time he pressed his nose to the corner and began to bark. Short, rhythmic, urgent. David quickly knelt, rapping his knuckles against the wall. Hollow. He wedged a pry bar into the seam. It cracked slightly, splinters peeling back. Behind the panel was a narrow tunnel, no more than 4 feet tall. Crawling space only. "Jesus," Isabella muttered. "That's not on any blueprint." David looked at her. "You staying topside?" "Hell no," she said. "And I'm right behind you." David crawled in first, Max following like a shadow. The air was cold, dusty. The tunnel twisted once, then opened into a smaller chamber. And that's when they saw it. A child's small, dirt-caked shoe with Velcro straps. Next to it, a cracked sippy cup, a pink headband, and a torn page from Brown Bear. "Brown Bear, what do you see?" David's throat tightened as he scanned the room, his flashlight beam trembling slightly. The space was barely 10 feet wide. No lights, no bedding, just the relics of children who shouldn't have been there. Then Max barked loudly. David whipped around. The dog was sniffing a large metal vent in the wall, disguised behind a wooden slat, just like before. Isabella climbed in behind them. "What is it?" David pointed to the vent. "Something's behind that." They worked fast, prying the slat loose with a crowbar and flashlight. The moment it came free, a gust of stale, warm air whooshed out, and then a sound, faint but unmistakable. A cough. Then another. David and Isabella froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Isabella nodded. "That's a person." David leaned toward the vent. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Nothing. Then, after a long silence, a tiny voice. "Help!" David's heart stopped. He turned back toward the tunnel. "We've got a live one." It took nearly 20 minutes for a full emergency team to reach the second chamber. Max refused to leave the tunnel. David had to leash him and pull him back as fire and rescue arrived with gear, oxygen, and stretchers. Inside the second chamber, hidden behind 2 layers of paneling and a false vent, they found him. A little boy, no older than 3, curled in a ball behind a pile of old blankets, barely conscious, covered in dust, his lips showing signs of dehydration, his skin pale and clammy. David knelt beside him. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The boy slowly opened his eyes. "Doggy," he whispered. Max stepped forward and licked his cheek gently. For the first time in what had likely been days, perhaps weeks, the boy smiled. Upstairs, chaos erupted. Ambulances lined the curb, detectives swarmed the property, parents screamed, and news vans pulled up. CPS officers escorted children out, shielding them from flashing lights. Miss Peterson was taken into custody after Jenna, shaking and tearful, told the full truth. "She made us keep quiet," Jenna said. "She said the child had special needs and her parents were dangerous. She said the girl needed protection. I didn't know she meant underground." Records soon confirmed the boy's name. Elijah, 3 years old, reported missing 6 days prior from a town 30 miles away. His mother had pleaded with local news for attention, but the case hadn't gained traction until now. As Elijah was wheeled out on a stretcher, Max walked beside him. Camera flashes sparked. Someone shouted, "That dog! He's the one who found him!" David placed his hand on Max's head. "Always finds them." That night, David sat alone on his front porch, Max at his feet. It had been the longest day of his life. Harper was safe, rehydrated, and under medical observation. Elijah, too. But more questions emerged. Who built these rooms? Who else knew? Was Miss Peterson acting alone? For now, David could only think of Max. The dog who once saved him in a war zone had just saved a little boy from a nightmare beneath a daycare. He looked down at the old Labrador. "You're not done yet, are you?" Max looked up, tail thumping once. Somehow, David knew this story was far from over. David Miller hadn't slept. He sat in his living room at 3:12 a.m., a mug of untouched coffee in hand, Max curled at his feet. The old Labrador finally rested, ears twitching in a dream, but David couldn't stop hearing the little boy's voice. "Help! Doggy!" 6 days underground, and Elijah still had the strength to smile when Max licked his cheek. That image was seared into David's soul. He'd been on the force for nearly 15 years, seen countless horrors, but nothing shook him like what they found under that daycare. The worst part? If Max hadn't clawed at that floor, no one would have looked. No one would have known. And deep down, David had a gnawing feeling they still hadn't found everything. By sunrise, investigators were digging, not just into the physical building, but into records, permits, and former employees. That's when things began to reek worse than the basement air. Little Star's Daycare had changed ownership 3 times in 12 years. The original owner, Ms. Francine Brewer, operated it from 2011 to 2016, then abruptly disappeared after a CPS investigation into unexplained injuries involving 3 children. That case had quietly closed due to insufficient evidence. After Brewer vanished, a shell company bought the property, then leased it to Annabelle Curran, who renamed it Rainbow Kids Center for 3 years before abruptly shutting down. Then came Ms. Peterson, taking over in 2020 under another LLC, renaming it Little Stars, and omitting the basement from all license forms. When confronted at the county lockup, Ms. Peterson claimed ignorance. "I didn't build the chamber, it was already there." But she used it. She didn't answer further. David didn't buy it. Later that afternoon, he stood with Detective Isabella Reyes and a structural forensics team in the second chamber where Elijah was rescued. The air still felt heavy. Max sniffed the walls, more subdued but uneasy. "See this?" the lead forensics expert said, pointing to the left corner. "That concrete's newer than the rest. Different mix, less mold." David crouched. "So someone sealed this off recently? Within the last year, I'd bet money on it." Detective Reyes tapped a concrete chip. "You think there's something behind that wall?" "Could be," the expert said. "More space, or just to throw us off." Max padded toward the wall, sniffed twice, then sat. "That's his alert posture," David said. Reyes looked over. "Even when he's not on duty?" "Always. When he sits like that, he's telling you something's there. He just doesn't know how to reach it." "Well," Reyes said, "let's find out." It took nearly 2 hours to break open the wall. They worked slowly to avoid damaging anything inside. When the final layer cracked, a foul gust of air poured out, making even the professionals flinch. They shone a high-powered light through the hole. It wasn't another room, but a tunnel. Long, narrow, with dirt walls reinforced by plywood beams, no more than 3 feet high. A passage that looked hand-dug and recent. The forensic tech turned to David. "This wasn't built years ago. That dirt's fresh," Reyes muttered. "Where the hell does it go?" David turned to Max. "You ready?" Max stood, flashlights, gloves, headlamps in hand. David, Reyes, and a backup officer entered the tunnel. Max went first, belly low, tail straight, ears sharp. It felt endless. 50 feet in, the air grew colder. The tunnel forked once, then again. Whoever built it had done so with purpose. Then they found something buried in the dirt. A metal lunchbox, dented and rusted. David slowly opened it. Inside were childlike crayon drawings, names scrawled in shaky handwriting. One showed a child in an underground box with "No Talking" in red crayon above it. Another showed stick figures with black lines for mouths crossed out. The last drawing depicted a dog, big ears, brown fur, and a girl holding its paw. Harper, David swallowed hard. Someone had been keeping children here long enough for them to draw about it. The tunnel narrowed after that, ending in a wooden grate leading up to another floorboard. David looked up. It's under another room. They took a GPS reading. It wasn't under the daycare anymore, it was under the adjacent building, once a dentist's office, then a church, now abandoned. David and Reyes secured a warrant within hours. When the team entered, the smell hit them first. Formaldehyde, used to preserve specimens. They quickly swept the ground floor. Empty rooms, cracked linoleum, broken chairs. Then Max barked once, then twice, at the back wall of what had been the waiting area. Behind a sagging bookshelf, they found another door, padlocked. A crowbar quickly removed it. Inside was a room like something from a horror film. Shelves lined with storage tubs, old journals, cassette tapes, and a wall covered in Polaroids, all of children, faces blurred, names scrawled underneath. Some names matched missing persons reports from as far back as 2009. David stepped back, bile rising in his throat. Reyes whispered, "This isn't just a rogue daycare. This is a trafficking ring." David felt cold all over, and Max, standing still in the center of the room, let out the softest whimper David had ever heard. At the precinct, the FBI was now fully involved. State police task forces, news media. What began as a K-9 alert at a small-town daycare had now become a multi-agency investigation spanning 3 counties and nearly 15 years. David sat at his desk staring at the files, photos, and timelines spread across the wall. So many names, so many children, some rescued, some still missing. And one Labrador who had never stopped doing his job. He looked down at Max, curled beside his chair, head on his paws, still alert, even in sleep. "You knew," David whispered. "You always knew." And this time, people were finally listening. By the 5th day of the investigation, Officer David Miller's office had transformed into a war room. Polaroids covered every inch of the bulletin board, color-coded pushpins marking names, locations, dates, some crossed out, some circled. Maps were taped to the walls. A dry erase board held columns for known victims, unconfirmed names, suspected connections, and locations yet to search. In the center under the desk sat the cracked lunchbox filled with crayon drawings. Max lay there, head between his paws, tail flicking slightly with every open door. David hadn't truly been home in 3 days. He showered at the station, grabbed coffee across the street, and kept a change of clothes in his trunk. There was no time for rest, not with the case growing larger by the hour. What started as one sealed trapdoor had exploded into a statewide manhunt for a ring of people hiding children, falsifying daycare licenses, and making them disappear across jurisdictions. And now, someone was desperately trying to erase what little evidence remained. It started with the files. Detective Isabella Reyes called David into the precinct's records room that morning, looking furious. "Take a look," she said, slapping a folder onto the table. David opened it. "Little Star's licensing packet," he said. "We already got this." "Wrong," Reyes countered. "We got a partial copy. This is the full version I pulled from the county archives in person." David scanned it again, then saw it. A signature on the final page. Annabelle Curran. "She was the one who ran the daycare before Ms. Peterson?" David asked, eyebrows raised. "Didn't she shut down in 2019? "Yep. But here's the twist. Curran didn't just run Little Stars. Before that, she owned 2 other facilities in southern Georgia, under different names, both shut down after licensing issues. And get this, she was married to a man named Alistair Blackwood." David's blood ran cold. Alistair Blackwood? The pastor who ran the old church next door? Bingo! David sat down slowly. "So you're telling me the daycare and the abandoned church were connected through a married couple?" "Not just that," Reyes said, lowering her voice. "They owned both properties under a holding company called Evergreen Holdings. Sound familiar?" David blinked. "That's the name on the shell company that bought the daycare after Francine Brewer vanished." "Exactly. They've been using the same company to swap properties, change names, and move kids for over a decade." David stood and paced. Every time CPS got close, they switched ownership, changed the name, painted the walls, moved the operation 2 blocks down. And every time the records got a little thinner, Reyes added. Permits went missing, staff files disappeared, CPS reports were mysteriously closed, and no one ever connected the dots. David looked toward the bulletin board where Harper Lynn's photo sat beneath a yellow sticky note, reading, "Recovered alive." "How many kids are still missing?" "2, Reyes said. "From 2009 to now, most under age 6. All had brief enrollments in facilities connected to Curran or Blackwood." David felt the walls closing in. He turned toward Max, who now sat up, ears alert. "You ready for one more?" he asked quietly. Max wagged his tail once. They drove to the county records annex, an ugly beige building smelling of old paper and burned coffee. A contact from the mayor's office had called David that morning, reporting something strange. Upon arrival, the clerk waved them in without hesitation. "I didn't want to say this over the phone," she said, "but someone came in yesterday with a badge, said they were from CPS and requested all licensing files for Evergreen Holdings properties. I thought it was legit, but something didn't feel right." David leaned in. "You get a name?" "Just initials. He signed the visitor log as ER. But I've already checked. There's no active CPS investigator with those initials in this county." "Did he take anything?" "Yeah, 3 boxes of files, including old facility records from 2014 and 2015. That includes a building in New Harmony, one we never connected until now." David cursed under his breath. They were getting too close. Someone inside the system was helping wipe the trail. Back at the station, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Jenna, the daycare assistant who'd spoken up, remembered something she thought was irrelevant. She texted David late that night. "I remembered something. I think one of the kids left something in the toy chest, a name tag or bracelet. They told me never to open that chest, but I think it might still be there." David and Reyes returned to Little Stars after hours. The building was now an active crime scene, sealed and guarded, but they had clearance. The toy chest sat innocently under the nap room window, bright yellow with a painted rainbow. David pried it open. Toys. Old stuffed animals. A broken tambourine, and tucked beneath a stack of books, a laminated hospital wristband. He held it up. Name: Caden M. Admit date: May 12, 2022. David frowned. Caden wasn't on any daycare rolls. Reyes checked her phone. "There's a Caden Mendez reported missing in Savannah last year. 5 years old. Last seen leaving daycare with a female guardian. Case went cold." David turned the wristband over, scrawled on the back in crayon. "Doggy will find us." He blinked hard, throat tightening. "Caden believed someone was coming," Reyes said softly. "That's why he left this," David whispered, and Max did. It all began to click. The tunnels, the rotating buildings, the shell companies. Every move was designed to stay one step ahead. Children were shuffled like shadows, records deleted, paper trails burned. But not anymore. Now they had connections, names, evidence. And they had a Labrador with a nose for truth. Back at the station, David stood before the bulletin board and added a new sticky note under Caden's photo. "Believed alive. Search active." Then he looked down at Max. "You didn't just find Harper and Elijah," he said. "You gave every one of those kids a second chance." David knew, deep down, the final piece of this nightmare was about to come to light. The first arrest came at 6:17 a.m. Alistair Blackwood, the former pastor and daycare financier, co-owner of multiple Evergreen Holdings properties, was apprehended in a North Carolina mountain rental cabin. He had grown a long beard and shaved his head in a desperate attempt at disguise. Authorities found fake IDs, an encrypted laptop, and a duffel bag with burner phones and cash. He did not resist or speak. As David Miller watched the news flash on the precinct TV, federal agents were already knocking on doors across 3 states. Annabelle Curran was arrested at a private home in Tallahassee. 2 other employees from Rainbow Kids Center surrendered once charges were filed. Slowly, painfully, the web began to unravel. Evergreen Holdings was not just a shell company, it was a front. Over a dozen buildings across Georgia, Alabama, and Florida had been used as temporary re-education chambers for children deemed unmanageable. Some were autistic or speech delayed. Others were labeled defiant or slow learners. The rest, no one truly knew how they ended up there. But David knew this: they were all victims. And none of this would have come to light without Max. This horrifying realization settled deep within David. The perpetrators, cloaked in community service and religious piety, had systematically exploited society's most vulnerable members. It was a chilling reminder that the greatest evil can wear the most benevolent mask, preying on trust and desperation. Harper Lynn was back with her mother Stephanie, reunited quietly at a secure trauma recovery center outside Atlanta. Stephanie held her daughter as if she would never let go. David watched from a distance, hand resting on Max's back. "She asks about him every morning," Stephanie told him, her voice thick with emotion. "She say anything else?" David asked gently. Stephanie nodded. "She says she always knew he'd find her." This profound detail spoke volumes about Max's impact, a glimmer of light in Harper's darkest memories. Elijah was also on his long road to recovery, his parents' fragile hope nurtured by visits from the gentle Labrador. In the weeks that followed, Havenwood transformed. The Little Stars Daycare building was demolished by court order, its foundation excavated for forensic review. A plaque now stands at the site, honoring the children found and those still missing. The adjacent church, once a symbol of twisted faith, became the Havenwood Child Advocacy Center, a beacon of hope funded by donations nationwide. Volunteers from Savannah, Atlanta, and Charlotte helped create therapy rooms, legal aid desks, and a memorial hallway for survivors. This community response was a testament to their resilience, their refusal to let darkness win, showing that unity and compassion can emerge stronger, even in the face of unspeakable evil. And Max became a legend. Local kids painted murals of him downtown. A bakery sold hero dog biscuits in his honor. One teacher even wrote a children's book, The Dog Who Found the Light, a bedtime story of courage and unwavering loyalty. But the best recognition came a month later, on a warm evening at the Havenwood Civic Center. David stood in the auditorium's wings, adjusting his tie. He hated such events. Public speeches, applause, cameras. He was a patrol cop at heart. But tonight was about Max. The MC, a well-known news anchor, stood at the podium before hundreds of parents, officials, survivors, and rescue workers. "And now," she announced, her voice ringing with emotion, "it is our great honor to present the Silver Paw Medal for Distinguished Animal Service, the first of its kind, to a canine who not only served his country, but came out of retirement to save the lives of innocent children here in Havenwood." The crowd stood as Max trotted onto the stage beside David, wearing his polished vest and ID tag. He blinked into the lights but didn't flinch, his tail giving a gentle thump. David accepted the medal on his behalf. He leaned into the microphone. "I've worked with Max for over a decade. He saved me, protected strangers, and sensed danger before anyone else could smell it. But this was something different. He heard what none of us wanted to believe, and he wouldn't stop until we listened." The applause was thunderous. David looked down at Max, who wagged his tail once. It was all the thanks he needed. This moment powerfully reminded them that heroism isn't always about grand gestures or human accolades. Sometimes, it's about unwavering loyalty, innate instinct, and the simple profound act of caring. The smallest among us can be the most impactful. After the ceremony, David walked Max to the edge of the Civic Center lawn. A gentle breeze blew, and laughter echoed from families nearby. Kids ran in the grass. Parents snapped photos near the memorial wall. It almost felt like peace. He crouched beside Max and scratched under his chin. "You did good, partner. Real good." Max nudged David's chest with his nose, then settled beside him in the grass. David leaned back and stared at the stars overhead. The question he'd been avoiding floated into his mind. What now? The case was technically over. The ring dismantled, the property seized, the victims, those who could be found, were safe. But trauma didn't end with arrests. Justice didn't erase memories. There would always be more work to do. The fight for justice, as David knew, required constant vigilance, especially against those who exploit the innocent and vulnerable. This story is a stark lesson in how deep evil can hide, cloaked in respectability, preying on trust and societal loopholes. It's a testament to the fact that corruption can exist at any level, and sometimes the greatest threats come from within the very systems designed to protect. But it's also a testament to resilience, the unwavering hope of those who have faced darkness, and the profound impact of those who choose to listen, to fight, and to believe. For the first time in a long while, David allowed himself to breathe, to hope, to believe that one dog could truly change the course of dozens of lives. Max had shown them that courage doesn't retire, that instinct and loyalty can save lives, and that even in the darkest places, someone is always listening. Max's story transcends Havenwood. It's a powerful testament to the strength found in unexpected places and the fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. It reminds us that while justice can be served, the scars of trauma remain, and vigilance against unseen evils is a perpetual responsibility. If Max's story touched your heart and you believe in the power of hope and the fight for justice, please consider sharing it. This story, and others like it, remind us that in a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming, vigilance and compassion are our most powerful weapons. Be the voice for those who can't speak, trust your instincts, and never stop looking for the light, no matter how deep the darkness may seem.